So there was once a man, a crazy man, or in his words, an idealist, a man who had great wealth and an obsession for chivalry, and who decides to leave his great estate one day to live out his revolutionary quest. And he fights a few enemies along the way, like a true knight, right? Giants of the time, closed-minded people who can't see their worth, and even he fights even his own madness. But what truly makes him crazy is that he sees goat herds as equals. He sees one prostitute as how she could be, sweetness itself. He challenges social orders and stigmas and prejudices, and he truly, without a doubt, without a single doubt, that one man scorned and covered with scars can change the world if he sticks to his quest. Don Quixote is an idealist who charges at windmills and who dreams of slaying dragons, but he also treats those on the margins with respect and honor, even while all the time he's thought by the world to be a madman. Yet at the end of his story, we find that he's taught a community to believe the best about themselves and about each other. He's led his squire, Sancho Panza, and the prostitute and kitchen maid, Aldonza, to not only embrace his so-called quest and this foolish quest, but to share and appreciate the value of the task of making the world a better place by the way you treat it and those who are in it. Now, his family and his friends, the lawyers that he knows who handle his estate, the political figures, and of course, the priests of the church in La Mancha, the region of Spain that he lives in, they all believe him to be absolutely mad, absolutely insane. And they try to convince him of his madness at first. They try to tell him, this isn't real. You're just having delusions. You're getting old. You just need to sit back and rest now. Enjoy your wealth. Enjoy the estate you have. Just enjoy life. But they all fail. And then they try to have him declared insane and put into an asylum. Don Quixote, to me, sounds a lot like Jesus of Nazareth. The verses I read at the beginning of the service are probably familiar in some way to probably all of you. They're the opening verses of what's called the Sermon on the Mount. Now, the Sermon on the Mount takes up 3 chapters in the Gospel of Matthew, chapters 5, 6, and 7. But even though they're from the Christian scriptures, they've become ingrained in our society around the world. Blessed are the peacemakers. How many times have we heard that? It's a bumper sticker, no doubt. Or how many times have you heard or used the phrase, she's the salt of the earth. This person is the salt of the earth. Perhaps you remember from your American history class, the sermon preached by the Puritan leader, John Winthrop, while the first group of Puritan immigrants was still on board their ship, the Arabella. They were waiting to disembark and create the first settlement in what would become known as New England. And in that sermon, he famously said, "For we must consider that we shall be as a city set upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us." That was a quote from the Sermon on the Mount. According to the author Fritjof Schwann, who is a perennialist, someone who studies scriptures and sees universal themes and themes that repeat over and over again, the message of the Sermon on the Mount is a perfect synthesis of the whole Christian tradition. It has the largest number of perennial and universal doctrines and spiritual advice of all scripture. Much of what Bible readers remember from scripture derives from the Sermon on the Mount. Now, maybe that's your experience too. I know it's mine. I grew up reading and studying those verses so much that, frankly, they simply became one more rote lesson like the ones I learned in school over and over again. And it wasn't until I got older and began reading and studying for myself that I began to understand just how radical and difficult it is to actually live them. And they still are today for me in many ways. Now, the first time I ever heard of Don Quixote was when I was about 10 years old. and I wanted to see the musical Man of La Mancha on Broadway. I don't remember how I learned about it or knew about it or why I had any interest in it, because at that point, I had still had no interest in theater. That would be a few years later. And I had no contact with musical theater. Maybe it was an ad in the newspaper or something that I saw, or something on the news. But I do remember that the musical had by that time become a worldwide phenomenon. And it was being staged all around the world in different theaters. So my sister took me to see it. And I was really excited because I do remember seeing clips of him and on the news, or hearing Richard Kiley, the man playing Don Quixote, sing The Impossible Dream. You remember how popular that song was at the time. I think the singer Jack Jones made a version of that was very popular. But I remember seeing Richard Kiley, and we sat down in our balcony seats, and there I was, this little 10-year-old kid, waiting and waiting and waiting. And I couldn't wait to see him. And just before the orchestra began playing the overture, the announcer came over the loudspeaker and he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, the role of Don Quixote this evening will be played by Somigoro Ichikawa." I will never forget the name, because Richard Kiley had recently gone on tour in a different country. They were doing a festival of Don Quixotes all around the world. And I was there waiting to see Richard Kiley, and instead I got to see a very well-known, famous Japanese actor by the name of Somigoro Ichikawa. Now, don't get me wrong, Mr. Ichikawa was a great Don Quixote, but he wasn't Richard Kiley. And I was really, really disappointed. I got to see the show. Now, a few years later, many years later, actually, the show was reprised on Broadway, and Richard Kiley brought the role back. And I bought tickets. I was so excited. I was finally going to get to see Richard Kiley in the role of Don Quixote. So we went to the theater and we sat down in our balcony seats. And just before the orchestra started playing the overture, the announcer came out on over the loudspeaker, and he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we regret to announce you that the role of Don Quixote will be played by so-and-so this evening because Mr. Kiley has the flu." I didn't get to see Richard Kiley again. And then, unfortunately, Richard Kiley grew old and he never did the role again, and he passed away. So I never got to see Richard Kiley, but it's still a great play. So what is the quest Don Quixote dreams of? To Don Quixote, it's to live out actions that bring about change in the world. To Jesus, it's to live in and live out the kingdom of heaven, or as we often say, and I prefer to call it, beloved community, daily, no matter if, as Don Quixote says, we win or lose. Don Quixote's vision and his dream were sacred to him. But his appearance, if you've seen the play or read the book, was kind of silly. In the play, he puts on some makeup, the actor who portrays him puts on some makeup and powder in his hair, and he looks gray and disheveled. And he proudly holds in his hand a twisted old tree limb that's going to serve as his spear. And he wears a common barber's shaving bowl on top of his head as a helm. And so he's going to go into the world and right all those wrongs, to fight evil, to be an honorable knight. His looks and his vision seem foolish. He looks to be a madman, right? After teaching on the mountain, Jesus would be called the same. Foolish, mad, crazy. Remember, they said, "Where is he from?" They said he's from Nazareth, and people would say, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" But what he taught to them, to those people, that's not how the world works. And this isn't what those who came to hear him expected to hear. The setting of the Sermon on the Mount was familiar to people in Jesus' time. They were frustrated with the Roman occupation. the advance of pagan culture and the oppressive living conditions that they had. And they all fueled this fire of a messianic expectation. And they were expecting Jesus to, rile them up and give them some confidence that they could finally defeat Rome. And to the average observer, Jesus was another in a long string of people claiming to be the Messiah in a politically turbulent time when anti-Roman violence was considered acceptable, even necessary by most people. You remember the zealots, right? Barabbas was a zealot. Later on, after Jesus had died, a few years later, another so-called Messiah rose up. His name was Bar Kokhba. His rebellion was put down too. However, Jesus' audience was about to have everything they believed challenged, every expectation challenged. Their ideas concerning the kingdom of power and glory were about to be turned upside down. You remember, I've spoken about it in the past, in the book of Acts, I think it's chapter 5, where the disciples, Paul and Silas, they go to a city and they're arrested and they bring them before the magistrate and they say, these men have come here and they've turned the world upside down with their manifesto. The Sermon on the Mount is Jesus' spiritual manifesto, his vision, his dream, and it has a surprising message. It's an upside down kingdom. But Jesus was a radical reformer whose mission was to challenge what society believed about how the world worked and how people should live in it. And like Don Quixote, he believed that life is a quest to seek what is good, what's loving, what's right, to face those evil giants we see all around us, and to conquer evil with good is what Jesus taught. It's what Don Quixote taught, but what others couldn't see. Jesus and Don Quixote both see the best in people. Those verses I read, the blesseds, the blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those are called the Beatitudes, and they reflect the primary theme and a way of seeing reflected in Jesus' life and ministry. That beloved community is present and available to all. In contrast to what the Pharisees believed, what their expectations were. The blessed ones of the kingdom, they're not the most righteously devout, but rather they're the poor in spirit, the mourners, the meek, the hungry, those who thirst for righteousness. And as opposed to the zealots who resorted to violence, Jesus announced that blessed are the merciful, the pure in heart, the peacemakers, people who refuse to return evil with evil. Later on in his ministry, he'd say that we should love our enemies and do good to those who hate us. That was radical then, and it's radical today. Don Quixote, in his travels, he meets a tough woman named Aldonza. She's a kitchen maid at the inn where she works and a prostitute. And he stays there with Sancho. And her posture and her voice and her attitude were giveaways to him of her history of being used and abused by men. But no sooner does Don Quixote sees this woman named Aldonza, than he addresses her with love and adoration. And she'd never heard words like this before when he calls her my lady. Don Quixote describes vividly all that Aldonza felt that she wasn't. But he continues and he says, I dare not gaze full upon thy countenance, lest I be blinded by thy beauty. And Aldonza's deep and justifiable distrust of any man, these words, they just enrage her even more, and she explodes in bitterness and she lashes out at him. She thinks that he's just another man trying to use her. But he continues to speak to her with love and with tenderness, and he sees her with the eyes of the divine. And he calls her Dulcinea, He changes her name to Dulcinea, which means sweet one. And he treats her like royalty. Her real name, by the way, Aldonza, means good-natured. And if you've read the book or you've seen the musical or the opera, you'll know that she's anything but good-natured. But no one has ever spoken to her like Don Quixote. But it does start to change her. His vision changes her. Jesus' vision, commonly called the Beatitudes, as I said, offer people a new way of life to those people who believed they didn't matter to anyone. It changes people because love does that. It changes the way we see ourselves. We have regrets, we've made bad choices, and we've hurt people perhaps. It's hard to forgive ourselves. And yet, when we are shown the love that we can find in beloved community, we're transformed. We're changed people. And Don Quixote sees the best in people. Others see what exists, but he sees what is possible. He sees what we refer to in our liberal religious tradition as the inherent worth and dignity of everyone. Jesus saw that too. He turned no one away, but he welcomed everyone who truly wanted to get into the kingdom, into beloved community. And for both Don Quixote and Jesus, that community was already present if people had the eyes to see it. It wasn't about some pie in the sky future. Remember, Jesus in the Gospel of Thomas says, if they tell you that the kingdom is in the sky, then the birds are going to get there before you. If they tell you that it's in the sea, then the fish are already there. But the kingdom, he said, is already present and spread around all about you. It's within you and without you. To many people who heard it, that was a dangerous message. It was the opposite of what they'd been taught. It was the opposite of their experience. It was madness. And to the leaders, the religious leaders and the political leaders, it was the opposite of what would help keep them in power. Don Quixote says this. He says, I have lived nearly 50 years. Pain, misery, hunger, cruelty beyond belief. I've heard the singing from taverns and the moans from bundles of filth on the streets. I've been a soldier and seen my comrades fall in battle. I have held them in my arms at the final moment. Now listen carefully. When life seems lunatic, who knows where madness lies? Perhaps to be too practical is madness. To surrender dreams, this may be madness. To seek treasure where there is only trash, too much sanity may be madness. And maddest of all is to see life as it is and not as it should be. Tomorrow, we'll be again celebrating the birth of one more idealist, one more person who, according to many people, seemed mad, insane, who really believed all that stuff about peacemaking and dignity and cities on a hill. One more dreamer of the seemingly impossible dream, but a dreamer whose words are as true and as vital to remember as they were in 1963 when he first spoke them on the Mall in Washington. I have a dream, said Dr. King, that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream that one day in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, my country 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride, from every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. So let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Canada. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring. When we allow freedom to ring, when we let it ring from every city and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, great God Almighty, we are free at last. Like Jesus and Don Quixote and Dr. King, people may say that we're crazy for trying to change things. We hear it a lot today. I do in conversation, that it's useless. We should just accept things as they are, that we're tilting at windmills. But don't believe them. Those windmills are actually evil giants in disguise. The giants of racism, the giants of sexism, the giants of hatred of our LGBTQ sisters and brothers, the giants of ageism, all those giants. And like Sancho at the beginning of his journey with Don Quixote, those people obviously don't know much about adventures. So keep tilting away. May it be so.
If you enjoyed this video, please like us on YouTube, subscribe to our channel, and click on the bell to be notified whenever we post a new video.